It is disheartening to see Charlottesville be pegged as this one attack and this one weekend.
I love Charlottesville. I've lived here most of my adult life. And I would love for Charlottesville to be a shorthand for all the good things that I know the place is associated with.
Jews will not replace us! White lives matter! White lives matter! Anti-white! Anti-white!
The problem is, it's now a shorthand for racism, far-right extremism, and things that hurt me every time the label's mentioned.
What is this? Like, it's 2017, like this is really still happening. People are really sitting here, you know, calling people niggers and spics and Jews, and it's just, you know, like threatening people, you know, walking through black neighborhoods, just trying to incite people.
I just had to wonder, as an American, how did we get to this place in this country?
The article of suffrage, which the convention will today adopt, does not necessarily deprive a single white man of the ballot, but will inevitably cut from the existing electorate 4/5 of the Negro voters.
Will it not be done by fraud and discrimination?
By fraud, no. By discrimination, yes.
After federal troops withdrew, former Confederates that had been banned by the Reconstruction government from being in office start coming back into office, passing local ordinances, promulgating state constitutions such as that we see in Virginia in 1902 and others that are disenfranchising blacks and pushing them out of public life.
Discrimination. Why, that is precisely what we propose. That exactly is what the convention was elected for. To discriminate to the very extremity of the permissible action under the limitations of the federal Constitution, with a view to the elimination of every Negro voter who could be gotten rid of legally, without materially impairing the numerical strength of the white electorate.
In the area just beside the courthouse, there was a black and mixed-race neighborhood there called the McKee area. This area was seized and black folks were moved out for the purpose of a public park there, which was where the Stonewall Jackson Monument was installed in 1921. So this effectively took what had been a thriving black and mixed-race neighborhood and pushed these folks out in order to make of it a whites-only space that was anchored with this monument to the slaveholding South. The Lee Monument was installed in 1924 in the Central Park area of downtown, and it was established also as a whites-only park. It's as if the state, by erecting and maintaining these monuments, is giving a clear signal.
Charlottesville is a classic college town. It's where the University of Virginia is. But it's a lot more than just UVA. There's the downtown mall, there's wineries, breweries, restaurants. It's a great cultural town with lots of art and music. I think a lot of folks from Charlottesville really have a passion and a pride for Charlottesville.
I believe Money Magazine and a lot of other popular periodicals have described Charlottesville as a top city to live. Good public schools, beautiful, lots of resources available.
This is a community that voted 80% for Barack Obama and 80% for Hillary Clinton. And because of that, it considers itself very progressive in every way. But that doesn't mean there isn't a big gap, income and in other ways, between African Americans and whites who lived in and around Charlottesville.
Charlottesville, as inclusive and as diverse as it is also a city of great disparities. And as a reporter, I've seen that in daily news coverage. You drive by these multi-million-dollar homes and you have these UVA elite professors and students. And then on the other side of it, there is a lot of history here of racial inequality.
At the end of the day, Charlottesville is a small southern town. Many of the sensibilities that actually influence daily life and institutional life in the city are quite conservative, in a kind of small C conservative sort of way.
It's a city that has a dark cloud over it. It's a city that portrays to be for everyone when clearly it excludes people of color.
There's an affordable housing crisis in this city. Many people that serve the city in capacities throughout the university, the largest employer, as well as in other places in the city, can't really afford to live here.
I think for generations, most of white Charlottesville felt like everything was fine. Most of black Charlottesville felt that things weren't fine, but that nothing was going to change, and things sort of went on the way they were. So in 2012, the Festival of the Book, which is one of our big festivals in Charlottesville, featured Ed Ayers as the big banquet speaker for the luncheon that launches the festival. And he gave a talk that the Civil War really was about slavery. And then he talked about the aftermath of the war. During the 19-teens and 20s, there was the erection of these monuments across the South to the heroes of the Confederacy. And that those statues were put up very clearly as an effort to undo the work of Reconstruction. But as he talked, I thought, wouldn't this be the perfect moment to start talking about these monuments and say, do these really stand for who we are now? And if not, should we move them? But there was this kind of gasp in the crowd when I asked the question. And the next day, the headline in the paper was, City Councilor proposes removal of Confederate statues. And so immediately started getting threats and nasty phone calls. Somebody came into our driveway and plastered Confederate stickers on the backs of our cars. It got ugly really fast.
You can really trace the roots of what happened in Charlottesville to that mass murder that occurred in South Carolina in 2015. Dylan Roof was a white supremacist who murdered 9 African Americans, including a state senator, during a prayer service at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. Roof readily confessed to committing the shooting, and he said that he hoped to ignite a race war. The Charleston murders led to the removal of the Confederate flag from the State House in Columbia, South Carolina.
We are here in a moment of unity in our state, without ill will, to say it's time to move the flag from the Capitol grounds. This is a moment in which we could say that that flag, while an integral part of our past, does not represent the future of our great state.
After Charleston, cities all over the country, including Charlottesville, stepped up efforts to remove Confederate statues from public places.
The historic record is clear. Robert E. Lee, Jeff Davis, P.G.T. Beauregard statues were not erected to just honor these men, but as part of a movement which became known as the cult of the lost cause. This cult had one goal and one goal only: through monuments and through other means, to rewrite history, to hide the truth. And unlike when these Confederate monuments were erected as symbols of white supremacy, we now have a chance to create not only new symbols, but to do it together as one people.
In early 2016, February or March, I did a story with a Charlottesville high school student who had created an online petition. She wanted to have the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee removed from the park. She said it made her feel uncomfortable looking back on it now, the time we were in, early 2016, a presidential campaign that became very divisive was just getting underway. This gave an opportunity for this issue to become a big issue here.
The Civil War was a war about oppressing another race. And so the statue to me is just a constant reminder to Black people that we should be inferior to those that don't look like us. We should be afraid of those that don't look like us. And we should always remember where we came from. If we live in a society where morals, principles, and values mean the most, how can we represent something that didn't stand for any of that?
Charlottesville Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy did a press conference in front of the Lee statue in what was then called Lee Park, announcing he would be pushing this effort forward to get City Council to remove the Confederate statues.
No one should ever feel uncomfortable when coming to this park in general at all. There should be no debate about that, especially when it's a public park and people pay their taxes to make sure.
Zayana Bryant, she gave her remarks and started hearing a little rumbling. So people kind of saying little things in the crowd. I'm like, okay.
This is not unity. This is hatred. Change the statue!
There were some other speakers, and then we see the temperature rising, right? I spoke, and they're shouting, "You coward, you communist, you socialist, you lied, let us speak." They're trying to literally drown out the voices of the supporters.
In my position, civil rights, as well as the opportunity to make everyone feel included, trumps history. Thank you all.
And so it was then that, Wes Bellamy took this petition to his colleagues on City Council.
I've led the call for the creation of a Blue Ribbon Commission to discuss this issue of Confederate memorials in our city that were installed by the government during the Jim Crow era.
And that process created a lot of controversy. There were people that had strong views that the statues were a symbol of a racist past and should be removed. And there were other people that felt strongly that they were important recognition of history and that they should be contextualized rather than removed.
I'll never forget getting several calls, and one of the calls said, "Well, Wes Bellamy, everybody thinks you're so great, but we're gonna break you down. We're gonna take your job, we're gonna take your positions, and we're gonna get you off council." And then they were using terms like, "Trump is your president now, you're going to obey him, and we're gonna take back what's ours." My inbox was then flooded with every kind of nigger you can think of, being told I'm gonna be hung from all kinds of trees. So is this really about the statues or is this about race?
My name is Jason Kessler, and I'm here on behalf of over 900 petitioners to demand that Wes Bellamy be removed from his office as a councilor for the city of Charlottesville.
I think what led to the events of August 12th was that this guy named Jason Kessler just happened to live in Charlottesville. He was a white supremacist who had been trying for years in this town to figure out a way to be an agitator and to be recognized. He had participated in the Occupy movement in Charlottesville. They camped out in Lee Park, as a matter of fact, for several months. They kicked him out because he kept talking about violence, and that was not their approach. After they kicked him out, I guess he found a new people in the right wing and got associated with the alt-right.
Ms. Zakos and the other counselors have betrayed their every liberal progressive value to secure the incestuous relationship between Ms. Zakos and her disgraced protege.
Subsequently, months later, Mr. Kessler published a series of tweets of mine and social media postings from, I think I was like 21, 22, 23 years old, that also sent shockwaves throughout our community.
I owe this city and this area everything, including an apology. I'm sorry for the tweets that I sent in my early to mid-20s that were made public last week.
They used those words to say, see, we told you this was not just about statues. This gentleman clearly doesn't like white people. He doesn't like homosexuals. He doesn't like anyone who does not agree with him. And that shifted the argument.
Wes Bellamy is a black supremacist and a rape fetishist, and among other things, Wes Bellamy needs to get the hell out of our city council.
That was the beginning then of this back and forth with Jason Kessler in his efforts to, I think, bring Wes Bellamy down. He went then to get a permit for this rally and started getting attention from leaders in the alt-right and white nationalist movements because of these tweets that he had uncovered about an African-American vice mayor.
Activists, both black and white, showed up en masse in Wes's defense, and this also helped to solidify the movement against statues. It had the reverse effect that Jason Kessler sought. On January 31st, Mayor Mike Signer called a big press conference, had a rally outside City Hall in front of this free speech wall. And there were hundreds of people there. I was there.
If you want to extinguish the torch of our magnificent American democracy, then you're going to have to come through all of us first.
Basically sticking a finger in Trump's eye and putting the Trump administration on notice.
And that is why I'm here today, to declare that Charlottesville, the historic home of Thomas Jefferson, is a capital of the resistance.
You know, I can tell you as governor, I never want to hear anybody say that. No, Charlottesville is not the center of resistance. Charlottesville is the center of innovation. Charlottesville is the center of technology. You know, I spent all my waking days as governor recruiting businesses. They want to come to a state that's open and welcoming. What happened, of course, is, you know, the white supremacists saw that and figured what a perfect place for us to come and wreak havoc.
The Confederate monuments debate, the uncovering of the vice mayor's offensive tweets, and then the mayor's declaration of the city of the resistance, of the capital of the resistance, those three things together really put Charlottesville on the map for the alt-right. And there our troubles began.
We have a very large immigrant population. We are a relocation center for a lot of international refugees. And so these populations come together and celebrate themselves and each other during the Festival of Cultures. That same day, Richard Spencer called for a white supremacist rally to take place at a park about 3 blocks away along the same street.
We are a people. We will not be replaced.
I'm here to take part in this great celebration of our heritage and to also say no to the city of Charlottesville. You are not going to tear down this statue and you're not going to replace us. No one here is committing violence. This is a peaceful demonstration. We're talking about who we are and what we care about.
And all of a sudden, there was a large group of young white men
Racist, get out of here!
marching and chanting along with various different flags.
Racist, get out of here!
These young men were marching down Jefferson Street there and came into Lee Park. They were intimidating some of the immigrants. This was scary to us in the activist community because until that point, we'd always been able to track these guys. They caught us flat-footed.
Then later that night, we started hearing that there were people with torches standing around the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. I sent a reporter down there, said, get down there, see what's going on. By the time our reporter got there just a few minutes later, it was gone.
It was an image that we weren't used to seeing, people marching with torches, and chanting things like blood and soil were concerning to a lot of people.
This felt so much like an invasion. It was incredibly shocking. And as an African-American person, it is hard to underestimate the terror that this spectacle generates.
May 13th happened spontaneously, by design. I think the Spencer Kessler group wanted to have this event without a lot of counter-protest activity. And by doing it spontaneously without a permit, they were able to do that. They were able to have their event, and it wasn't until very late in the event that anyone noticed or came to protest.
By the time we were here, there was a big pack of people with torches.
A lot of people in Charlottesville were surprised that there were 100 people that were able to organize at the statue and pull together an event at which they were openly discussing their racist ideology. There was a huge backlash against that the next night, on Sunday night, where there was a candlelit event at the statue meant to counter the speech of the night before.
That was the first moment that we knew this was more than just a debate about keeping some old statues in parks, and it was turning into something a lot more than that.
I think it made a lasting impression of the things to come, and it was a preview of the things to come.
The presence of two people who have Charlottesville connections, really, Jason Kessler and Richard Spencer, both of whom are UVA graduates. They met in the spring of 2017 and collectively decided that they would use Charlottesville as a place to espouse their ideology, to bring people together around the statues, but again, to touch on these broader issues of race and identity.
Let me tell you, I'm a proud Southern man, and when I was told that I was going to be speaking in front of the Lincoln Monument, I made sure I had this flag with me, because Lincoln was a traitor.
What does the word diversity mean? Anti-white.
We will be scrubbed from the historical record. Inside of a generation, it will be as though we never existed, other than as some false historical narrative like Hitler's Germany.
We are fighting to be strong again, to be beautiful again. We are fighting to be powerful again in a sea of weakness and hopelessness. That is our battle.
We should not be fighting amongst ourselves. We should be fighting with the media. All these fucking leeches. They come here with their cameras to film you. This is not a movement for entertainment. This is a movement for revolution. So get yourselves armed, make your blacklist of the media, and buy a fucking helicopter. Thank you.
Fuck the fake news. It all, you know? Make sure you guys come out on August 12th to the Unite the Right rally.
You will not replace us! 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 You will not replace us!
Jason Kessler announced that he was planning a Unite the Right rally for August the 12th. The whole town was dismayed, and this was made all the worse by the announcement by the North Carolina Loyal Knights of the Ku Klux Klan that they were going to have their own rally at the Jackson statue on July the 8th.
So for weeks, people in Charlottesville were aware, because of the permit application, that the Ku Klux Klan planned to come to Charlottesville and hold a rally, as is their constitutional right to do. And that allowed the city to organize, that allowed law enforcement to come up with a plan to protect the free expression and the public safety of those who attended. And it allowed a lot of people to prepare for and attend the event in a way that wasn't possible on May 13th.
Law enforcement has a responsibility to ensure that free speech is enabled, no matter how much we may disagree with the message.
So when you have hateful speech that creates a strong backlash, strong emotion, the city has to have plans to protect people, all people, people that are speaking out hatefully and those who are protesting against that. And that's hard, right? So these two rights, the right to public safety and the right to free expression, directly conflict.
The city, community groups, churches made this big call weeks in advance saying, come to our counter events. Don't show up in the park. Don't give these Ku Klux Klan people any more attention. And let's make this a day about community unity. So there were concerts, there were activities for families far away from where these Klan members were coming to rally.
Let the KKK preach their hate to the trees and the birds.
Our mayor at that time, Mike Signer, had said we should ignore them and not go. Well, I think that is ridiculous. Both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. My mother was never in a camp, but my mother lost all of her family either to death camps or she saw her brother being rounded up. She saw him being shot by the Nazis as he tried to run away. Her whole family was murdered. My father was in 3 concentration camps. The last one was in Auschwitz. He had been previously married and had a child. His wife and child were both killed by the Nazis. He had 5 brothers. Everyone in his family was wiped out. So no, I think we have to speak up, and I intend to always speak up.
For days beforehand, police had set up barriers and had put out announcements that the KKK would be separated from the people who were demonstrating against them.
The Ku Klux Klan members were expected to arrive at a certain time. They didn't. There was this wait period of, are they going to show up? Are they skipping out on this? 20, 30 minutes of people just waiting and wondering, where are these Klan members, really built up a tension out in this park. The counter-protesters got louder, making their voices heard.
There were about 40 Klans people who met at a disclosed location outside of town, arranged with the city police department. They were escorted to a parking lot. They were walked into a very small area adjacent to the Jackson statue. There were more than 1,000 counter demonstrators.
And there were a number of people, about 20, who were arrested, counter-protesters who were doing nonviolent direct action, kind of civil disobedience. They'd locked arms to keep the Klan from entering the park. Those folks got arrested.
They said their piece for maybe half an hour. They were mostly drowned out. I heard hardly any of what they said, even being right in front of them, because everybody was chanting and shouting back at them.
It was a bit of a joke in other ways because there were so few of them, and it showed that these people really don't have the support that we might have thought they did.
It felt like the Klansmen were there to grab attention, and they succeeded in that, but the way that Charlottesville showed up in force to counteract them was what I thought was interesting and was really the telling story of the day in the end.
As the protest concluded,
we provided protection for those members to be able to get out of the park and into their vehicles so that they could leave. What ensued, however, was the counter-protesters were angry that they came to City of Charlottesville, as you can understand. It was very difficult to get them out of the city because there were protesters preventing their passage, and we ended up having to disperse them so that we could get them out of the parking garage.
Well, there were a lot of people that were angry that the police had used tear gas against a crowd of anti-racist demonstrators. People believed that it was unnecessary, that the police acted too aggressively. There were a number of arrests made that people believed were unjust, and that created a real negative backlash against city government and law enforcement. That then informed the planning for August 12th. Because of that community criticism, the police were hesitant to be militaristic, be overly aggressive, be perceived as those things in the lead up to August 12th.
And that was the dominant sentiment then going forward to the Unite the Right rally. Was a deep mistrust between the activist community and the police, and resentment toward the city council, for not doing what they should to kind of intervene in this.
White power! White power! White power every day!
After July 8th, there was a lot of fear about August 12th.
Someone shared an article from the Daily Stormer with me. And in that article, they said, next stop, Charlottesville, final stop, Auschwitz. And it became very real for me in that moment that this was going to be bad.
The city manager, the city council, they ultimately decided to attempt to move the event from the Lee statue in Emancipation Park out to McIntyre Park.
Having the demonstration at McIntyre Park is safer because the park is large enough to accommodate the size of the anticipated crowd.
They won't even let us have the First Amendment rights that our ancestors gave us. Our ancestors gave us those rights, those civil liberties, that these people are coming over from India and the Middle East and whatever, and thinking that they have more rights than we do. Fuck you. Fuck you. We are going to demonstrate in Lee Park. The world is going to see it. We are not going to back down.
I knew that the Unite the Right was being held. It had been in the newspapers for weeks. But like most people who live on grounds at the University of Virginia, I hadn't paid particular mind to it because it was focused on downtown Charlottesville. And there is a big gulf between that downtown area and the university area. Town versus gown is as true here as it is in most college communities. I really was not informed about the potential for disruption until Wednesday evening before the Friday march. I was having a dinner with the president of the University of Virginia and her husband, and she asked me whether I could be on the lawn on Friday evening. The semester hadn't started, but lawn students were moving in on Friday. And she was concerned that there was a possibility that some of the people coming to this Unite the Right rally would show up on the lawn that evening. None of the other pavilion residents were available. They were traveling, which is perfectly normal and acceptable at that time of the year.
On Friday, throughout the entire day, we had lawn residents picking up their keys, moving into their rooms, and everything seemed normal and calm.
I was pretty anxious to move in for the semester. The whole day kind of felt surreal because the lawn is a place where you see the legends of people who have come before you, these fourth years who are super accomplished.
There was some chatter online in the days leading up to August 11th that there would be some sort of Friday night event. As early as the beginning of the day on Friday, there was more and more of a focus on the university. Spencer and Kessler had attended the University of Virginia, and there was more and more intelligence that they planned on doing something at the university on Friday night. At about 3 in the afternoon, there was a direct notification made to university officials that there was going to be a torchlit event at the Jefferson statue adjacent to the rotunda on Friday night. So the university police, the university leadership, had 7-8 hours notice that there was going to be a unpermitted march with torches on university grounds on that Friday night, August 11th.
I think that law enforcement and university administrators were expecting what they would conceive of as a free speech event. We have a long tradition at the university of making sure that free speakers are protected and have the capacity to speak, and I think that the white supremacists who came here relied on that.
I found out around 8:30 that the alt-right was coming to do some kind of demonstration. So our rooms just have one door that open out directly onto the lawn itself, whereas the pavilions have back doors and gardens and back alleys attached where there are multiple exit points.
I went around to visit the residents who'd moved in, along with the head resident here, a student, urging them, if they could, to go someplace else. And we made available Pavilion 4 for students who were concerned or worried or afraid.
I had been attending nonviolent direct action trainings. Other students from across the state were in town. We were all having dinner together, breaking bread and talking about why all of us were here and why we came to fight. Some intel sort of came in, and people were like, all right, there's actually going to be an action tonight. And there's 2 actions that we can do. We can go to this church where Dr. Cornel West is speaking. The other party was supposed to go, confront the white supremacists.
They had focused on this big rally on Saturday. That was their event. And I didn't think they would risk having some kind of disruption or widespread arrests the day before their big event. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong.
We arrive on grounds. The sun had already set. It was kind of getting creepy. Just looking back, I just had no clue what I was about to go do. And we knew that Jason Kessler and his goons were around, but we didn't know where they were. And so we creep up the lawn because we didn't know if they were on the lawn or not. We get to North Plaza, which is where the Jefferson statue is. It's on the north side of the rotunda. It's a very beautiful, symbolic place for the university. I remember seeing a lot of weird people skulking about who I didn't recognize. It was difficult to tell, whose side they were on. I think at that moment I was pretty much skeptical of any white person that didn't look young and I don't know, whatever. The people who are hanging out are looking like they're about to see a show, and that's I think when I started to be okay, something's actually about to happen here. The plan was we're gonna link arms, we're gonna circle the statue, and we're not gonna let them have their way tonight. We talked about our safety protocols. We agreed to a buddy system. You stay with your buddy no matter what.
That evening, I left the group of protesters and community organizers that were in my house preparing for August 12th, probably about 9:15 to go over to St. Paul's Church where Cornel West was speaking. And we started to see groups of neo-Nazis, including Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler, walking down University Avenue with unlit tiki torches toward No Name Field. And that's when we knew this was actually going to happen.
We're out here at the University of Virginia where alt-right groups are assembling and lining up right in front of me, about to light up torches. to precede the Unite the Right rally tomorrow.
Let's go! Start lighting your torches! Start lighting your torches!
Late tonight, a federal judge in Charlottesville gave the green light for the Unite the Right rally to be held in Emancipation Park.
If the ACLU was not successful today and the Charlottesville city government was allowed to deny us our constitutional First Amendment rights, we might be in a different situation. As of today, the Constitution was upheld, and the people who founded this country have a fighting chance to take it back.
We are stepping off in 2 minutes!
And that was very, very disruptive, because for that whole period of time, from Monday, when the city attempted to get Kessler to move it, to Friday night, the city's position was this should be happening in McIntyre Park. So there's no information going forth to the public about what's going to happen, what streets will be closed, what public safety measures will be taken.
Hey, come on, turn it up! Get the fuck up here!
So you have all types of groups with all types of creeds, but ultimately we're all being united because we all believe in the same thing, which is ultimately that white people have a right to exist, and they have a right to a nation which can be all their own.
Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
I was standing on the veranda outside the church while Cornel West was speaking inside. And the mood continued to get more and more tense as it became clear that there were neo-Nazis in the neighborhood, there were white nationalists in the neighborhood, and the event that was going on in St. Paul's Church was being threatened by those forces.
If these people decided to come to the statue after all, they were going to leave straight from Nameless Field, head up University Avenue, and then walk up the steps to surround the statue. That seemed the clear, obvious, direct path. They were coming up the interior of the University of Virginia, walking through the grounds to then get to the statue by rounding the rotunda. Nobody was expecting this to happen.
Who street? Our street! Who street? Our street!
I still expected them to march down University Avenue because that's what I was told. And all of a sudden, with just a few minutes' notice, I was standing up at the rotunda and the face of the lawn extended, and I saw little torches appearing from the end opposite to the rotunda.
Right as I was about to go to bed, I heard what can only be described as an angry mob.
Who's town? Our town! Who's town? Our town!
And I looked out my peephole and just saw a river of flames marching up the lawn and to the rotunda.
There were so many of them. That was what was so stunning about it. I had expected at most a few dozen people, but I think there were hundreds. They had tiki torches and they were marching 2 by 2 in a very long line. And what it struck me as being immediately was a kind of revisiting of Nazi propaganda films from the 1930s. That's what they looked like. And I'd be surprised if some of their leaders hadn't studied them. From the very beginning, I could tell they were chanting something, and I couldn't really tell what it was. The closer they got, I realized they were saying, "Jews will not replace us."
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
I'm a Jewish woman of color living on the lawn, and I wear a Hamsa necklace, I wear a Shema ring, and I took off my Jewish identifying jewelry and I hid it because all of these Jewish identifiers were around my room and on my person. I thought if they knew I was Jewish and if they saw me come out of my room that they would light my room on fire.
You fucking get in the
formation. Stay the fuck back. Stay the fuck back.
Cantwell,
okay, you know what? I'm gonna stand right here face to face with you, you pussy.
Come on, come back with the coach, Cantwell.
Everything about them was offensive. They were grim, they were intimidating, they were loaded for bear. It was pretty obvious to me that something bad was going to happen. They weren't there on a lark and they weren't going to have a picnic. And I just kept thinking, what had failed in our country that we had developed so many young people, young males generally, who saw the world in this distorted, twisted way? Where did we go wrong?
2 by 2, come on. Move fast, move fast, move fast.
There were maybe 6 police officers scattered throughout. Professor Sabato then warned me, saying that for obvious reasons, I should stick close to him, and I obviously agreed. And went with him around the side of the rotunda.
They all marched up to the balcony of the rotunda and proceeded to go to the front of the rotunda, where there were some students and apparently some outsiders who were opposed to the white supremacists gathered.
I remember like seeing the glow of their torches on the other side of the rotunda, and we could like hear them shouting, and like, you know, it was just kind of like, if you don't want to be here, you need to leave now. And I don't think anyone really wanted to be the person who walked away. We jumped on the statue before fear set in, and we all locked in. And we didn't even have enough people to totally encircle the statue, which was crazy and scary because they were like really coming. And so finally some really brave people who were kind of on the sidelines decided to jump on at the last second. Just as we're like all linked up, we like look over and just suddenly like an ocean of flames starts like crawling down the steps of the rotunda, and it's not 30 people, it's much more.
You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
It's just like a bunch of angry white guys and a few women actually.
No Nazis, no KKK, no fascists, USA!
They came down and started screaming at the students, and the students started screaming back.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Fuck yourself! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Youth will not! Differences will not!
A student Antifa group is here, and the alt-right characters are surrounding them with the torches. There's only about 20 of the leftists, and hundreds of the alt-right surrounding them with flaming torches. No punches have been thrown yet, but I'm going to say that this is probably one of the most provocative situations that I've ever seen.
Anti-white! Anti-white! Anti-white!
And they quickly encircle us, and then you can't see anything but like the bright glow of flames, and it's scary as shit.
Around 10 o'clock, a community activist walked by and yelled up at me and said, "Hey, Walt, your students are over at the rotunda and they're surrounded by neo-Nazis. You should get over there." So I made my way quickly over to the rotunda, and I was shocked to see somewhere near 150 neo-Nazis and white nationalists with tiki torches surrounding a group of about 30 students who were locked arms around the Thomas Jefferson statue. I saw Alan Groves, the Dean of Students, there. I realized that the mood and the tension and the violence level were escalating.
So this brawl breaks out, and suddenly all these enormous white guys are rolling around trying to get to us, and it's difficult to tell who is who. And at one point, the brawl basically rolls onto me and my buddy. And so for like 5 minutes, we're just getting pelted. People are throwing torches at us, people are punching us. I was inhaling chemical irritants like pepper spray and mace. They maced a woman who was in a wheelchair. They maced my friends. You can't breathe, you can't see, you don't know who's touching you. All you see is just like hands and flesh and stuff.
So at that point, Alan Groves and I waded into the neo-Nazi, mob, going around the statue, asking each student, "Are you safe? Do you want to leave?" We didn't make it even a third of the way around the statue when I saw a flaming torch come flying across the air and hit Alan Groves on the arm. It looked like it cut him. It also smelled of burning tiki oil, and I was afraid people were going to start catching fire at that point.
Finally, one of the sergeants turned to two of the police behind him, a policeman and a policewoman, and pointed very directly at the center of the action. And those two police officers broke the record for the 100-yard dash. They got down there in an instant and tried to break it up to the extent they could. But there were too many people fighting in too many places and too many tiki torches being used as weapons. After it was over, I couldn't believe it had happened. But I realized that I had seen the worst thing that had unfolded on the lawn in my nearly half century here at the University of Virginia. And I knew that it would be always remembered. I didn't go downtown to see what happened on Saturday because we feared that some of them would break off from the main group and come back to the point of their great triumph on the previous evening. That was also true on Sunday. Those were sleepless nights for most of us who were still here, and every time there was a noise on the lawn, we jumped up and ran to the window. Fortunately, they didn't come back then. I think the fear is still present that they will. As much as I oppose them and everything they stand for, strategically, they made a smart choice. They decided to strike before anyone else, to grab the Saturday headlines, to increase the temperature, which they did, and it was already very hot on that August day. And it contributed to the disaster that unfolded not just in Charlottesville, but on all the national networks.
Well, me and my fiance Marissa was laying in bed one night, that Friday night.
And we see my friend Courtney Commander's Facebook Live video, beating students with the tiki torches and everything like that. I was infuriated that Charlottesville was allowing this to happen, that all these people were just running around our community unchallenged. So that was the thing that really got us up on August the 12th, and we were like, we're going, no question.
Tomorrow we're going to have the Unite the Right rally, as we said we were, at 12 p.m. Everyone who can peaceably assemble is welcome to come. This is a free speech rally. This is a peaceful rally. This city of Charlottesville is paying out the butt because they fucked with the wrong man. They fucked with the wrong movement. The alt-right is here, and you're gonna pay the bill, Charlottesville. You should have just allowed us to have a normal demonstration without trying to fight us in court. See you at Unite the Right tomorrow at 12 p.m. Don't be late. It's gonna be like nothing you've ever seen.
So after the events, the night of August the 11th, I kept telling myself, I'm not going out there. I know my temper. I'm gonna put my hands on somebody. I'm going to jail. I'm not built for this. But that Saturday morning, something came over me and was like, you've been to every meeting. You've spoke up on this issue. You can't not go. Even though I feel that this city don't love me the way that I love it, I'm still gonna go out there and I'm gonna protect my city because this is my city.
I was simultaneously like worried about how bad the violence would get because it did feel almost inevitable. And you know, after the way they had treated me and my friends the night before, it felt very personal and I was very motivated to get up the next day.
And it was about 6 in the morning that I got up to get dressed and ended up at First Baptist, meeting the clergy line as they were walking downtown. We got out there before anybody got out there. Basically, our toes were touching the sidewalk facing Lee Park.
It was only around 8 o'clock in the morning, and the Unite the Right rally wasn't scheduled until, I think, noon. And we were startled to realize that these white supremacists, bands of them, were already starting to rove around the city.
White lives matter!
And then about 8:30, a group of men and women in that military gear with long rifles, semi-automatic firearms, walked up the street. The introduction of such firepower into what we anticipated to be a very volatile protest was very, very concerning.
Welcome to Charlottesville.
I did get to speak to one of the men, and he was from Maryland, and he was there only to ensure First Amendment rights were observed and that people were able to protest. At some point, I decided to walk down the street, to walk around the city, what else was going on in the city, and I went down to the Charlottesville. They have a very popular farmers market. You know, you had joggers, you had moms walking baby carriages, went down, and they were conducting them just about 2 blocks from the park, as though this was just another regular morning. But at the same time, all of a sudden, these groups started to assemble. And a lot of white men wearing khakis and white polo shirts with flags in different insignia coming to the park.
They're like waving Confederate flags, they're waving Nazi imagery.
The police were up on the hill in Lee Park behind 2 sets of pins.
They exclusively focused on zones in and immediately adjacent to the park.
There was a group of cops in the Wells Fargo parking lot, which was the opposite side of Market Street, and then a group of cops inside those pins within Lee Park.
They had no officers along the routes of ingress into the park.
No police presence at all, none. So they have to walk in and go through the counter-protesters to enter the park.
They essentially said everybody just has to get to the park on their own.
If you're gonna allow 2 groups to collide that have opposing views, there needs to be some police presence there.
Gas the kikes and order raise war now!
There were people with sticks and shields and people wearing armor and helmets. And as they started to arrive in the park, there were fights breaking out almost immediately.
You ain't shit! You ain't shit! You ain't shit!
It wasn't particularly violent at first, but as the morning wore on, as more and more people started showing up for both sides, it got more and more heated. There was a huge police presence in the area, but they weren't stepping in to stop individual skirmishes.
This is News to Share, where we don't censor the news, so I'm just going to say it straight up. This is a complete shit show. Both sides have been deploying pepper spray against each other with very little resistance from the police, actually. I've now been pepper sprayed really by both sides. Fuck! Got him!
The ground commander for the state police saw that the Zone 5, which was troopers and officers assigned to the Wells Fargo parking lot, were exposed. So she directed that barricades be installed around the parking lot and that the officers be behind the barricades. She also said to her counterpart, the Charlottesville, the police ground commander, just so you know, we're going off plan.
Holy fucking shit, dude.
The plan called for arrests as appropriate. She was basically saying, we're not going to wade into the crowd to make arrests. We're here to protect the park. I think her term was, we're not going to wade into that mess on Market Street.
That was some sneaky fucking shit. Oh man, oh man.
There had been intelligence that officers would be rubbed with strips of fentanyl.
Watch out, they're throwing shit!
There were projectiles, cement-filled soda cans, or urine-filled balloons that would be hurled at officers. So they were, I think, justifiably concerned with their own safety.
Just the anger was building. I didn't see how it was going to dissipate. I'd covered lots of protests and demonstrations, but nothing where so many folks were armed and so many people had such vitriol against each other. And the numbers kept growing on both sides.
So how do you tell me that you're honoring your great-great-great ancestors by marching down the streets of Charlottesville next to people wearing swastika armbands and flying swastika flags and going Sieg Heil, Hi Hitler? We went to war against Adolf Hitler, against the swastika. And now you're gonna march down the street with people wearing stuff like that and wear that yourself? It was not about the statue. What did the Nazis have to do with the Confederacy? Nothing.
What do you think's gonna happen? Just a day in the park. Just a day in the park. Shields up! Hey! Stop! Come on! Please! Stop! Get out of here! Leave! Guess what happened? Fuck out of here! Fuck out of here! Fuck all of you!
I stood in the middle of the street all day. We went about 2 hours in allowing people to fight.
It sort of built and built and built. And eventually, still before noon, still before the scheduled start, there were hundreds and hundreds of people on both sides. People were pushing each other around, getting into fights, there were punches thrown, there were some bloody faces.
There came a time when these mobs started to get together and the violence we could not allow, and we need to bring this to an end, over, finish it.
Come on. Leave the area now, or you will be arrested. They can't hear you. They can't hear you. Has been declared an unlawful assembly.
When violence occurs, law enforcement has several options. They can declare the whole thing unlawful and shut it down, or they can step in and disperse, either arrest people or at least create separation such that the violence is stopped. It was pretty clear to us that the plan had always been that the response to violence would be declaration of an unlawful assembly as opposed to quell the violence and facilitate the speech. We developed evidence that the police chief, observing violence, actually encouraged his officers to let it go on so that there would be a predicate for an unlawful assembly. Let them fight was the word that he used in the command center.
Come here, nigga, come on. You want black liberation? I think I know where we go for that.
The officers who were going to enforce the unlawful assembly needed to put on their protective gear, and that was not with them, that was staged at the back of the park. So as violence occurred on Market Street, officers are withdrawn to put on their helmets and their shields and prepare for this militaristic march through the park of dispersing the crowd.
Holy fuck! Whoa, 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 whoa! Oh, fuck! Oh, there's some pepper spray in the air, bro. Holy shit, dude. You alright, dude? Here. I don't know what they sprayed, but it was really hardcore. Anyone within the area got fucking... These are actual fucking violent Nazi pieces of shit. I have no qualms about saying that, folks. Go ahead, motherfucker, I'm telling you. I'll shoot you. Go ahead, you want to play that way, I'll play it. Fuck you.
So from the moment that the police decide, okay, this is unlawful because of the violence, it wasn't until an hour later that the unlawful assembly is actually enforced and the crowd is dispersed. And when the crowd is dispersed, the Unite the Right protesters are thrust back onto Market Street into the counter-protesters, many of whom were there to disrupt the event, were there to provoke or commit acts of violence. So more violence occurs as people are leaving the park, just as it had as people were arriving at the park.
Fuck you, asshole! Fuck you! Fuck you! Pussy! Pop! Fuck yeah! Yeah, you ready with that Mason pussy ass nigga? Hey, nigga! Hey! Yeah! Yeah!
So once the park is cleared, there are 2 full squads of Charlottesville police officers and multiple state police troopers that do nothing but stay in the park and keep it clear. And there's really nothing going on at the park, right? It's been dispersed.
So once the crowd was dispersed from the park, we were obviously very concerned that there were still these alt-right members who were hell-bent on violence and hateful rhetoric were still roaming and marauders around the city. And then, of course, the counter-protesters, and some of whom were organized. Again, one of the reasons we were so vehemently opposed to it being in Emancipation Park, just for this reason, because once the crowd's dispersed, where do they go?
August the 12th, we got there. My friend Courtney Commander rode with us. You know, they already declared a state of emergency. People were just kind of walking around.
And we met Heather and Courtney at the McDonald's downtown.
When we pulled up, we didn't even know Heather was gonna be there.
From what I gather, she had not originally planned to go to the rally that day, knowing it was dangerous. But after she saw the videos of Friday night, she said to her friend, I have to go. I have to be there to back up my friends.
So we were walking from the McDonald's parking lot, and it was a group of like 30 of them, just like with flags, shields. And I had like on this hat that said fuck Trump. Me and Marcus both had on fuck Trump hats. So I'm just like, shit, like, you know, this is just us and it's a whole bunch of them. So I grabbed Marcus's hand and I go, I don't think this is a good idea. And Marcus is just like, you know, it's okay, it's all right, you know, I'm here, I got you. So I'm like, okay.
Got y'all running, man. Get the fuck out of here.
We went around just kind of looking to see, like, what is this? Like, it's 2017. Like, this is really still happening. People are really sitting here, you know, calling people niggers and spics and Jews, and it's just, you know, like threatening people.
Hell out of my way.
You go around the corner and you didn't know if it was police officers, you didn't know if it was neo-Nazis, you didn't know who was who.
That ain't shit. Do something, my nigga. Do something, my nigga. Holy shit, dude. Holy fuck. Jesus fucking Christ. Holy shit.
Do your job, man! Do your job, criminal! This is their job!
Come on! Y'all out here protecting these motherfuckers! Come on, y'all, wake the fuck up! Wake up! Get out of here! Wake up! Go! Y'all fucking our city up!
I came into our television station around 1:30 in the afternoon on August 12th. And it was kind of surreal because an unlawful assembly was declared before the Unite the Right rally even started. It was sort of a bust. We thought it was over. So that afternoon, it was eerily quiet in downtown Charlottesville.
But what was eerie was that every single business on the downtown mall was closed. It's normally on a summer day like that, on a Saturday especially, there's patios that are packed full of people eating lunch, having drinks, having coffee. None of that was happening. The downtown mall wasn't empty because there were people there for the rally, but it felt like a ghost town.
And there was a rumor going around that there was a group of alt-right protesters who were heading to Friendship Court, a largely African-American area.
Yeah, you guys are walking into a low-income neighborhood, just so you know.
And that then prompts a surge of counter-protesters to go to Friendship Court to prevent this rumored violence. What actually happened was that a small group of the militia had, we think, gotten lost trying to get back to their vehicles and ended up just across the street from Friendship Court. And the militia claimed to be neutral. They said that they were not there as part of the alt-right. They were there strictly to promote free speech, everyone's right to speak. But there is a confrontation that occurs right across the street from Friendship Court between some members of the militia and some counter-protesters.
Why don't you go home?
We were trying to.
So you can't leave now? Who said you can't leave?
We stopped here once that lady fell off the curb and hit her head.
Okay, so now you're ready to leave.
Tried to leave a while ago, but they kept pushing us forward. So we had to keep
Where are your
moving.
cars at?
Right up there. That's where we was trying to get to. But as you see, there's a wall of people.
If this area is clear, y'all will leave.
Yes.
Y'all go home.
Yes, if you can clear this area, we will leave.
And that is why there's so many people that are surging to that area. And when that small confrontation breaks up, that crowd is heading back toward downtown, and unfortunately, that's why so many of them were present at 4th and Water Street.
I really don't like confrontation. I don't like violence. I'm not gonna let anybody, you know, push anybody around or anything like that. Like, you know, stay inside and just leave them alone. But at the same time, you know, I'm not gonna go looking for trouble.
And then we found this large group of good people.
You know, happy people. There were people all like clowns in the street, people handing out food, water, like just being happy. There were those people that were around.
So we joined in with it. You have people out there with beach balls, have people walking up, hugging people, claiming victory.
So as I walked through downtown, I noticed a pretty large group of counter-protesters marching together. There were hundreds of them just off the downtown mall, and I decided that here's a group of people, here's something happening, I'll go take some pictures of that. So I stayed on the downtown mall and basically walked parallel to them to get ahead of them, to get some pictures of them head on as they were starting to walk toward me.
We got to the intersection of Water and 4th Street, and we didn't know which way to go. Like, the group just completely stopped.
And everybody was like, which way, which way?
And then we went left up 4th Street. We were walking down 4th Street, you know, everybody happy.
There was nobody that I could see from the Unite the Right rally who was antagonizing them or who was arguing with them. Nobody was fighting. It was the most peaceful Charlottesville had felt to that point all day. I heard screeching car tires and smelled burning rubber and sort of turned and a car rushed right past me down the road. I wasn't entirely sure what was happening in that moment.
I was staring at my phone because I was gonna go on Facebook Live, and all I could hear was tires screech, and I just look up. And so I pushed Marissa out the way, and I tried to get out the way, and that's when it hit me.
It happened so fast. I felt like a push. And then you saw a car back up. I knew my friend Courtney was okay because she was right there beside me. So we get up and we just take off running. Cause it's like, what is the car gonna do? Is the car gonna come and back up over us and, go for it again? So I ran into an alley.
Where's Marcus?
I ran up the hill thinking I would chase down the car and either see an arrest or see something newsworthy. But by the time I got to the top of the hill, the car was gone. So it was at that moment I looked down at my camera as I was walking back to where the crowd was, and I saw some really horrific pictures. That was the first moment that I really understood what had happened.
And after, seemed to quiet down a little bit, my hand's still shaking, first thing I think, where's Marcus? Like, I can't find him. And I went to the place where the car hit, and all I could see was Marcus's baseball cap. His baseball cap, blood all over it. So I didn't know. I thought something had happened to him.
Come back to where we was when the people got hit. They're right there. You okay?
Eventually I found him, he was okay. He didn't have any blood, on his head or anything like that. His ankle, something was wrong with his leg.
There was this coordinated attack where other attacks going to occur. We had seen for the first time a terrorist attack carried out by a motor vehicle in the United States. A couple hours after that, we still had the helicopter in the air to give us situational awareness from the sky, and that's when we heard the helicopter down. We found out that we lost two state troopers, Trooper Burke Bates and Trooper Cullen. What was a horrible day even got worse.
A lot of my good friends were hit by the car. In fact, my buddy the night before was struck rather violently by the vehicle, and they're still recovering. Once that attack happened, I think that's when the day was just over. Once we knew someone died, the whole atmosphere changed and no one wanted to fight anymore.
We eventually got, to the hospital. It was like something out of a movie scene, like stretchers lined up all around the hospital, police officers checking people for weapons. And I knew Marcus was okay, I knew Courtney was okay, but it's like, where's Heather? And I watched my Facebook Live video, I could see Heather right in front of me when the car struck. So I told my friend Courtney, I said, go back to McDonald's, go back to where she parked, because, she probably just got in her car and, she left. If her car isn't there, everything's okay. Courtney went back to Heather's car, back to where she parked, her car was still there. Heather came with us, so everybody was looking for everyone they came with, and no one would be looking for Heather, so, officer called me into one of the waiting rooms and he told me that Heather had passed. And that was just, oh man. We didn't plan to be around anything, any violence or any neo-Nazis or anything like that, and it just showed up. It's like it found the happiness and it found the hope and it found the goodness, and it tried to crush it.
The hospital was looking for Heather's next of kin, and I was at my best friend's house. And that was 45 minutes of hell as we drove to the hospital. I went in, they searched my bag. I'm trying to be patient. There's people in line ahead of me. I'm gritting my teeth. I'm dancing foot to foot. And finally they acknowledge me. They hand me a number 20. Number 20. And of course I walk in and kind of feel sorry for that detective. He looked at me very sadly and he said, I'm sorry, Heather was pronounced. And I don't even remember what he said after that. I just put my head down and I sobbed. And then the German stoic in me kicked in and I said, well, I'm proud of how she died. So I didn't actually see her again until the day before the funeral, and I had to officially identify the body. But I held her hand and I said, I'm gonna make this count for something. Nobody gets to shut my child up and get away with it.
We know as now 3 fatalities today, in addition to many individuals who have been hurt. And I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You came here today to hurt people. And you did hurt people. I spoke to the president this afternoon, and I told the president that there has got to be a movement in this country to bring people together. The hatred and rhetoric that has gone on and has intensified over the last couple months is dividing this great nation.
But we're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
There's absolutely no question that no matter what else happens in Donald Trump's term, that will be one of the low points of his presidency. He took a bad situation and made it much, much worse.
Well, excuse me. I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists.
This was just an extension of his winking and nodding at white nationalists And KKK.
Right here. What does today represent to you?
How you doing? This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children.
You know, if groups like this believe that the society is strongly against them and the public will react badly and backlash, they tend not to do at least some of the things that they're willing to do when they believe that they have backing in high places. They clearly believed they had backing in high places, and I'm sorry to say they were right, and they still are right.
We got this notice from Jason Kessler that he was going to have a press conference in front of Charlottesville City Hall to talk about what had happened the day before. Kessler said all these groups that were supposed to be at the Unite the Right rally that ended up not being able to have their rally because of the unlawful assembly, that the leaders of all these groups would be there with him in front of City Hall to talk about their next steps and what they had wanted to accomplish on August 12th. Jason Kessler shows up. Everyone thought, why is the most hated person in Charlottesville coming to speak to the community the day after a woman was killed and troopers were killed? He comes up to the microphone a couple times and says, just give me a minute, just waiting on some people. And he would turn and look at his phone. And every time he'd turn and look at his phone, it was like watching someone waiting for their date to show up that never shows up. No one showed up.
It really is a sad day in our constitutional democracy when we are not able to have civil liberties like the First Amendment.
It was Jason Kessler alone in front of the media and in front of dozens of counter-protesters who were hell-bent on drowning him out and running him out of Charlottesville. And there was just so much anger.
What happened yesterday was tragic. The denial of First Amendment rights.
All those other groups that had come on August 12th abandoned Jason Kessler. They didn't want anything to do with the death. They didn't want the publicity of that. I think he wanted his publicity and his moment, and no one else was there for that. And I think that said a lot about how all this even got started in the first place.
This racist shit has got to go. Hey, hey, oh, oh. This racist shit has got to go.
Charlottesville means we got to fight back. Charlottesville means
we got to fight back. No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA.
This is a real defining moment for our country. People all over the world watched yesterday. They saw what went on. Every elected official tomorrow should say, white supremacists, we don't want you.
Amen.
We don't want you in our state. All 50 governors, we all should say this.
White supremacy will be demolished. That's what the fuck is up, y'all.
Cities across the South are removing their monuments now. And each of them in their local areas are getting lots of pushback and lots of discussion and lots of controversy.
I believe that Charlottesville has set an example of what not to do. I believe that if Charlottesville were absolutely serious, it would follow the example of places like New Orleans that got rid of their monuments, the University of Texas at Austin, which moved its Confederate monument overnight to a museum, and let the consequences be damned.
What went through my head immediately watching what happened in Charlottesville was the amount of anger that was taking place, the disruption of a community, the protests. Immediately I began to think about how would we in Baltimore go about the business of removing those statues and not have to be confronted with that same kind of violence.
With the climate of this nation, that I think it's very important that we move quickly and quietly.
What I didn't want to see happen in Baltimore was what I saw in other cities, marches and people protesting. I wanted ours to be done very differently. I felt it was my responsibility to make a decision that was in the best interest of all the people of the city. And so I had decided that we needed to remove them. I believed in my heart of hearts that the implications of keeping those statues in place would have created the same kind of violence that Charlottesville experienced.
I'd like to begin the whole meeting tonight with a resolution by council regarding August 12th. Whereas the Charlottesville community became the target of hateful white supremacist groups on August 12th, 2017. So we're gonna...
In the city council meeting that happened right after the terrorist attack, the council wanted to proceed as if it was business as usual. They had their regular agenda, they were kind of going through it.
We have heard a lot of the comments from a lot of people about not only what transpired on the 12th, but just how things have been going. Trust and believe it will be addressed.
You can't pretend that this did not happen. You can't pretend that this is business as usual. Someone has been murdered, and our community has been traumatized.
So we're gonna suspend the meeting.
And the whole meeting just erupted because people were just really angry.
I want to tell you guys that you need to push to have Kessler, Spencer, and all of the other leaders of the alt-right and the police investigated. I want Kessler indicted for conspiracy like you indict the Black brothers from the...
Why did you think that you could walk in here and do a business as usual after what happened on the 12th?
How much blood are you gonna wear on your hands? How much? Because you invited those Nazis here because you let them show off here. So you made them feel welcome, and they felt welcome enough to come here and take somebody's child. They gonna come back.
This shit has got to stop. And it's got to stop now. Somebody's got to be held accountable. Somebody's got to be answerable for this weekend.
I have a fucking problem, and you got more fucking cops coming low-income housing for one time.
I think that this was just one of the examples of this question of wanting to kind of get back to normal very quickly. And I think that this is something that we still struggle with almost 8 months later.
Do your fucking job so we don't have to!
After the events of August 12th, the need to do something about the Confederate statues really seemed urgent. It was clear that the white nationalists felt that these were their symbols, that they were going to rally around them and that they might be back as long as they stood there.
A lot of people in Charlottesville, I know, have been very upset about why doesn't the city just take them down? Why doesn't the city just bulldoze them? Why doesn't the city just bring in a crane, lift them out, and move them someplace else? But Virginia law doesn't allow that. And that's hard for a community to understand when you see other cities in other states taking down statues left and right. There have been efforts in this year's General Assembly session to change Virginia law to allow communities to take down statues to Confederate generals and Confederate history if a community so chooses. Those have all been defeated in the Virginia General Assembly.
Someone suggested to me the idea of shrouding them. Just covering them up until we can do something more permanent. And the more I thought about that, the more appropriate it seemed that here we were in mourning for 3 lives lost on August 12th, and that those statues, as sort of a central catalyst for those events, it would be appropriate to shroud them in mourning for our whole community. If they do order the city to take the shrouds off, I worry about public safety. I think that there will be people who will consider that a victory for the white supremacy side. I think that there will be people who feel a need to confront that racism physically and will try to deface them or destroy them. And I worry about conflicts between those folks.
But we need to use what occurred here as a leadership opportunity, as an opportunity to learn more about what's happening in this country and get to a better place. And that's not really happening, unfortunately. We're still in the hurt and anger and pain stage, and we haven't yet gotten to the constructive discussion phase. And I don't know exactly when or how that's going to happen. But as a resident, I'm troubled by what occurred. I'm also troubled by our city's inability to talk to and listen to each other in the wake of those events.
You know, there's just a lot of anger and recriminations and finger pointing between community members and the city council members and the police, you know, just a lot of anger.
Well, we're having conflict every time there's a court case.
Go the fuck on, bitch! They didn't intervene because you assholes got the ACO.
So every time one of the Unite the Right rally folks or one of the counter-protesters has a court date, all the other people come and yell at them.
And then we blood on your head! I don't like it! Blood on your head! It's on your head! Blood on your head! You faggot! Blood on your head! Fields Court! Bigot motherfucker!
Not enough with you beating and killing people in the city of Charlottesville.
We've had a fair number of scuffles around that and some arrests at those. And, I think as long as that continues to play out, it's still going to be pretty tense.
This is the problem that we have.
Oh, I know.
And it's not impossible, but it's going to be hard.
That is the problem.
Exactly, because they won't talk.
That is the problem, right there.
No, that's not the problem. The problem is your fucking racism.
I know some of the players in the Charlottesville melee, and I had gone down there to meet with the head of the Ku Klux Klan. I know him. I get along fine with him. Do I agree with everything he stands for? Absolutely not. There's some things I do agree with him on. There are things that he agrees with me upon. But we have a respect for one another, and we are friends. And this is how you resolve problems, through communication. What I see today too much of is too many people talk about each other, or they talk at each other, or they talk past each other.
You are the reason all this is happening! Why?
You were engaged in a conspiracy to violate civil rights.
What I prefer to do is sit down and talk with each other. And these protesters were not about it. You cannot beat hate with hate. You can beat it through conversation, and you can beat it through love.
And you police, I can see who you take your orders from. I have no respect for you.
Get out of here, Kessler, you fucking murderer!
I saw a case last night of a well-intentioned person who followed a neo-Nazi into a restaurant locally and proceeded to berate the restaurant for serving the person and ended up getting kicked out themselves. And I thought, that's not going to be very helpful, because then you just look like that angry person and they will sympathize with the neo-Nazi rather than what you hoped they would do. We've all got a lot of learning and listening to do and thinking about how to make this happen. How do we get rid of the hate? Not by more hate. How do we get rid of the violence? Not by more violence. But there's also the concept that you have to defend yourself and you have to speak up. So it's a delicate balance, and finding that is not easy. I hope we're ready to do the hard work.
The Hafer Report is a report that I prepared with other members of our law firm that was an independent assessment of how the city of Charlottesville prepared for and handled a series of protest events in the summer of 2017.
Hey, why aren't you guys intervening in any of the fighting?
The police chief and the command staff actually told us at the very beginning of our review that they had a very positive story to tell, because in their view, it would be a very positive story about how they managed a very difficult series of events. The rank and file, most of the officers with whom we spoke had a very different view, did not see this as a success, but frankly saw this as a real failure, that they weren't put in the right position to do police work. One officer said to us, we had our thumbs up our ass. We talked to a lot of people over the course of our review on the alt-right side who acknowledged to us that their goal was to provoke.
I know those people. I know them personally. Some of them have even told me what I knew already. They were there to start the initial steps of a race war.
It's about goddamn time! Shoot! Fire the first shot of the race war, baby! Shoot!
White supremacists have been preaching about RAHOA, racial holy war. They chose Charlottesville because it was a soft target. The police department down there is very weak. They don't have the kind of training to handle that kind of protest, that kind of rally like a major city would have. Charlottesville was about RAHOA. It was a testing ground to see how far they could take it.
On August the 12th, the city could neither protect public safety or free expression. If you measure these events by those simple guideposts, simple in that they're both clearly expected, not simple in that they're easily achieved. They're not easily achieved. But on August 12th, the city did neither. Right? The event never occurred. There was no speech made. No Unite the Right person took to a podium and said a word. The event didn't happen. The city was not able to accommodate the permitted event. And it didn't protect public safety. People were brawling on the streets of our idyllic community. Heather Heyer was killed. There were a lot of people who were there to shut down and disrupt this speech, who did not share the view that the Constitution compels cities make forums available for hate speech. They were there to disrupt. Their job was to not just counter the speech with more speech, but to prevent the speech from happening. And that meant if it required violence, so be it. So you had here people on the alt-right and people on the sort of organized counter-protest left, both of whom were bent on violence, bent on confrontation. Not everyone. A lot of people who came to the Unite the Right rally weren't there to provoke. They were there because they believe in this ideology and they wanted an opportunity to say it. And most of the people who were there on the left were there to counter the speech with speech. But there was a core on each side that really wanted to fight. When you have people who are really bent on hurting each other or finding ways to fight, that makes it difficult to protect the free speech and the public safety. But again, we knew that going in. That information was available to planners because of all of this happening online.
Everything happens for a reason. For some reason that day, I feel like Heather gave her life. If Heather had to go on that day, what a way to go. Look at the message that, she's spreading. Look at her pictures everywhere, I just feel like if maybe it had been someone else, if it maybe had been, Marcus that had been killed, I don't think that people would have taken on the topic or the subject as much. Heather was a white female who, you look at her Facebook, that's all she talked about was social justice and, standing up for what's right. And it's just for some reason, I don't know, I feel like everything was supposed to happen that weekend. And it may be bad, but you always have to try to find the good within the bad. And I think a lot of good is coming from this.
We formed the Heather Heyer Foundation only 9 days after she was killed because money was pouring in from all over the world. And I said to Alfred, her former supervisor, we've got to do something responsible with this money. People can't possibly think it takes this much money to bury Heather. The only thing we could think of to do right away was to offer scholarships. And those are for kids who have already demonstrated that they are social justice activists and then want to continue their career in some way that will further social justice causes like law, medicine perhaps, education, social work. Heather had adopted a phrase, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And to me that says, find out what bothers you and try to make a difference. And we're not all called to march. There are a lot of things that you can do. Number one is vote and be willing to have difficult conversations with people. Maybe people that you're not usually talking to, people you're not normally comfortable with. Find those points of connection, make those connections, have those conversations. Because only as we begin to listen to one another do we start to get at the heart of the matter.
We were out there, although people told us not to be out there. They told us, don't give them what they want, just, they'll go home, just leave them alone. No, you have to stand up to bullies. If you believe strongly in what you're doing and what you're standing up for, don't let anybody sway you. We didn't let anybody sway us. We did what we thought was right. And what happened, happened. You can't live your life in a bubble. You can't just think, everything will work out. Everybody has a part to play. If you don't want to sacrifice your body or if you don't want to be out there on the front lines, and Marcus and I didn't think we were on the front lines. Me and Marcus were out there. We were just doing what we thought was right, and that's all that matters. Just do what you think's right. Follow your heart. Stand up for what you believe in.
I think people are inclined to believe that it can happen here. That is, it can't happen in your community or in the United States as a whole. We're a democracy, we're a strong democracy, authoritarianism can't happen. Or that the Nazi nightmare of the 1930s could never play itself out again. And I would agree that the odds are certainly against any of those scenarios. But what happened in Charlottesville said to me, in a way that I'd never understood before, it can happen again. And it can happen anywhere in America, and it can happen in America as a whole. And it's believing that it can happen that actually encourages the chances that it will happen.